By the winter of 1855, St. Mary's no longer resembled a house of God. It had become a crucible, a place where young women were broken and reshaped under the guise of divine service. And yet, no one outside suspected a thing. That's how institutional corruption survives, not through secrecy, but through appearances. Letters were sent home to families, always hopeful, always warm. But they weren't written by the girls themselves. A single hand penned them all. Sister Mary Collins, who had once shared a dormitory cell with Agnes, later confessed in an unsigned account discovered hidden in the bindings of an 1860 hymnal. We were told what to write. Those who hesitated were taken to the East Wing. When they returned, they were different, quieter, paler. One girl had a twitch in her left eye that never stopped again. And still, no authorities were alerted. Why would they be? This was a convent, a sacred space. The bishop visited once a year, praised the charity work, and left satisfied. The townspeople, long suspicious of the Catholics, chalked up the nuns' silence to piety. A few muttered that they seemed more like ghosts than women, but no one asked why. Because to ask why is to risk seeing the answer. Inside, Mother Catherine escalated. "Obedience," she began teaching, "is not enough. You must love your suffering. You must crave the will of your superior the way others crave the flesh." It was no longer about God. It was about her. She rewrote morning prayers to include invocations to unnamed saints. She made the sisters kneel before a statue of the Virgin, one that had no face. She claimed the convent was receiving visions, that a divine purpose was unfolding, but only the pure could understand it. Sister Teresa Donovan, one of the few who resisted, was assigned 30 consecutive nights of vigil in the mortuary chapel, alone, surrounded by death. She told another word, "A nun, the darkness there speaks. It's not God's voice." But by then, it was already too late. Teresa had seen something she couldn't unsee. And weeks later, she too vanished. 3 missing, then 6, all untraceable, all explained away. If you're starting to feel the sickness behind the story, good. That means you're still capable of waking up. Comment below, "Obedience is not purity. I see now." Write it twice. Lock it in. Because what's coming next demands more than belief. It demands allegiance to truth. Ask ChatGPT. In the convent's earliest days, everything appeared as it should. Morning bells, Latin prayers, the scent of wet stone and candle wax. From the outside, St. Mary's was a model of discipline and divine order. But inside, something was shifting. Slowly, strategically. Mother Catherine didn't rule with chaos. She used structure like a blade. She understood what most don't. True power isn't taken. It's built through agreement. And she made those young women agree, step by step, to their own erasure. First came the vow of silence during meals, standard in many convents. But here, it extended past dinner, then past recreation, then into full days of wordless labor. A penance, she claimed, for the sins of the world. They were told their suffering would cleanse the wicked. That silence drew them closer to the Virgin's own sorrow. Then came the corrections. Not for sins, for hesitations. A misplaced glance. A moment of laughter. A girl found humming while peeling potatoes was made to kneel in the garden for 12 hours, her rosary pressed into her outstretched palms. A sister who accidentally overslept matins was denied food for 2 days. They didn't call it punishment, they called it formation. You must understand, none of this broke the rules of the Church. That's the genius. Every act of cruelty was wrapped in the language of holiness. Every lash, a blessing. Every silence, a purification. The girls began to internalize it. That was the point. You don't control bodies, you control meaning. By summer, the nuns had begun reporting one another for infractions no one understood, smiling too long, pausing before genuflecting. The system was working. They were no longer sisters. They were instruments. Sister Agnes wrote in her final letter before her transfer, "I cannot feel my own thoughts anymore. They are replaced with her voice. I see it even when I close my eyes. The piété, le bleu of mother's stare. She sees everything. What you're feeling now, this creeping unease, it's not just history, it's recognition. Because these tactics didn't stay buried in the past, you've seen this kind of control before. You just didn't have the language to name it. Until now." Fog rolled off Lake Michigan like a warning the morning the first nun arrived. November 1854. The land was silent. St. Mary's, still unfinished, stood like a stone sentinel on the edge of the forest, its limestone facade grey against the bleeding sky. The locals, mostly German Lutherans and Norwegian Methodists, avoided the place. Some said the trees around it never grew straight. Others swore their livestock refused to graze near the convent's walls. But to Mother Catherine Murphy, it was perfect. She didn't come with fear. She came with intent. At 42, she had already developed a reputation within Eastern convents. Strict, brilliant, charismatic, but feared. Her sermons on purification through pain had earned quiet reprimands from Boston's bishops, yet her institutions thrived. Orphans cared for, infirmaries full, donations steady. She knew the game. You feed the poor to hide what feeds on the poor. St. Mary's was her reward, her dominion. The church handed her 30 acres, 20 young novices, and total authority. Unmarried, no children, no family ties. These girls came by ship from Ireland with nothing but devotion and names no one would remember. They were the perfect raw material for shaping obedience. Mother Catherine's first act was sealing off the East Wing, what she called the House of Contemplation. Only she and Sister Margaret, her closest confidant and the convent's herbalist, had keys. Within a week, the nuns were told that any sister who doubted her vocation would be invited to spend time in purification. No one spoke of it aloud. But late at night, the other girls whispered of strange screams behind the stone walls, low chanting, the smell of burning herbs. By spring, 3 nuns had been reassigned. No one saw them leave. This is where it begins, not in blood but in silence, not in violence but in control. Understand this. Systems of power never reveal themselves through chaos. They hide in ritual, in the expectation that no one will question, that everyone will obey. St. Mary's wasn't haunted. It was engineered. If you're still with me, keep going. You've already heard too much to walk away unmarked. In 1863, deep in the Wisconsin woods, demolition crews arrived to dismantle what remained of St. Mary's Convent, a crumbling Gothic estate consumed by rot and silence. But what they found beneath the chapel floor would never make the official record. A sealed stone crypt. 23 human remains, all women, all buried without rites. No headstones, no dates, no explanation. The local diocese declared them previously catalogued burials, a clerical oversight. But the coroner's report, one that mysteriously vanished from county archives a week after it was filed, noted something impossible to ignore. Most of the skulls bore signs of blunt trauma. Several were bound in rusted wire. One had a rosary jammed into its jaw, shattering the teeth. There is no official list of the dead, no mention of their disappearance in church logs. But a private letter, smuggled out of the Chicago Archdiocese in 1971 and hidden in a book at Marquette University's library, names a number. 23 Sisters of the Veil, all vanished between 1854 and 1862, all under the authority of one woman, Mother Catherine Murphy. If you've never heard of St. Mary's Convent, that's by design. This isn't a ghost story. It's not folklore. It's a suppressed chapter of American religious history that reveals the unholy alliance between psychological domination, institutional secrecy, and the corruptive power of unchecked authority. Because what happened inside that convent wasn't random, it wasn't madness. It was a system, a closed, ritualistic structure of obedience, isolation, and silence, designed not to heal, but to consume. This is the descent into the lost chambers of St. Mary's, where holiness masked horror, where devotion was weaponized, and where young women disappeared into the mouth of something far older than the Church. What you're about to hear is dangerous, because once you understand what happened inside those walls, you'll start to see the same patterns in places you were taught to trust. There is no going back. Welcome to the first day of your awakening. They were told the East Wing was off limits, but no one ever explained why. It was colder there, always, even in summer. The windows were nailed shut from the outside, and heavy wooden doors, reinforced with iron bands, creaked open only when summoned by Mother Catherine herself or Sister Margaret, the herbalist. What lay beyond them became the center of whispered dread. A place the other sisters called in private the Hollow. Sometimes they'd hear things. Not screams. That would be too human. What they heard were low, pulsing chants, metallic clangs like chains dragged across stone, and at times, something worse. Silence so heavy it felt like pressure on the lungs, a suffocating void that seemed to reach under the door and wrap itself around the heart. Sister Mary Collins would later write in a hidden journal, only rediscovered in 1924, "There is something beneath the convent, something old. I found a staircase behind the sacristy cupboard. It descends into the ground. The air changes. It hums. I didn't go far. I was afraid I'd never come back." But someone else did go far. In the spring of 1856, Sister Lucia, timid, bird-like, barely 20, began sleepwalking. Every night she wandered the halls barefoot, eyes open but vacant. One evening, she was found at the East Wing door, hand pressed to the cold wood, whispering something in Latin no one had taught her. She was taken into spiritual confinement that night. She was never seen again. Her bed was stripped, her possessions burned. When Sister Teresa asked where she had gone, she was told Lucia had succumbed to a crisis of vocation and had returned to Ireland. But there was no ship listed with her name. No letter, no trail. That was the pattern. They vanished, and the world was told they never existed. But records do exist, buried, suppressed, letters smuggled, names half erased. And in one bishop's private journal, his final entry reads, "There are powers beneath the old stone. She has awakened something. I fear it is older than Christ." St. Mary's wasn't built on holy ground. It was built to cover something up. You've felt it now, haven't you? This isn't about history. It's about the hidden architecture of power, the kind that survives by turning obedience into ritual and ritual into disappearance. And we're only just beginning. They called it a vocation crisis, but what they meant was collapse. By late 1856, the disappearances could no longer be explained away. The official number of sisters was 20, but at meals, only 15 bowls were filled. At morning prayers, only 14 voices chanted. No one was reassigned, no letters were sent. And yet, beds remained empty. But the girls had learned. Questions brought consequences. Mother Catherine's sermons took on a darker tone. She began preaching about the marriage of the flesh and flame. She said true brides of Christ must not only surrender their bodies, but dissolve them, that to become vessels of the divine, they must be hollowed. She began holding special masses in the East Wing. The sisters were told to fast before these nights, to purify, to open themselves. Afterward, those who attended came back changed. Sister Eleanor stopped speaking entirely. Sister Mary began waking with bruises in the shape of fingers along her ribcage. One girl, Sister Fiona, had to be locked in the infirmary after she tried to claw out her own eyes, screaming about the creature with no mouth that speaks in light. No one dared approach Mother Catherine, not after what happened to Sister Margaret. Yes, that's Sister Margaret, her right hand, her enforcer, the herbalist whose remedies had once cured entire villages. She was found in the garden one morning, sprawled among the hemlock. Her hands had been burned black. Her eyes, gone. Just sockets. And yet her mouth was smiling. Mother Catherine said it was a divine error, that Sister Margaret had attempted to reveal mysteries meant only for the sanctified. She was buried behind the chapel under a headstone with no name. After that, silence became survival. But Sister Teresa had had enough. She began collecting scraps of truth, letters hidden in hymnals, notes passed during sewing hour, floor plans drawn in candle wax. She believed there was a tunnel, an ancient chamber beneath the East Wing, older than the convent itself. She confided in Sister Mary, "There's something buried beneath us. It feeds on ritual, on suffering. Catherine didn't build this place to worship God. She built it to open something." That night, Teresa was taken. Her cell emptied before dawn. Only her rosary remained, placed carefully on her pillow, the beads knotted into a symbol no one recognized. Until now. You've seen it too, haven't you? Once you start to see the pattern, it never lets go. The symbol left on Teresa's pillow wasn't random. 3 loops, 1 slash, a spiral turning inward. Sister Mary didn't recognize it at first, but something in her body recoiled, primal, ancient. It was the kind of shape you don't just see. You remember. Not with your mind, but your blood, your bones. It appeared again days later, carved into the underside of the chapel altar, and again in the infirmary, scratched into the bedpost where Sister Fiona had screamed herself to silence. It wasn't Christian. It wasn't Latin. It was older, pre-contact, pre-Catholic, a mark that meant one thing across countless forgotten cultures: invitation. Mother Catherine called it the sign of purity. She said it marked those chosen to pass beyond suffering, into something holier than heaven. But Sister Mary wasn't convinced anymore, and in her final act of defiance, she entered the East Wing. It was a night with no moon. Rain battered the windows. The candles in the hallway sputtered as she passed, as if the very air resisted her. Behind the altar she found the secret latch, exactly where Teresa's candle wax map had shown. A low groan, then stone sliding against stone. The passage opened. It didn't descend. It sank. 23 steps, she would later write, into a chamber of impossible geometry. Walls pulsed with damp heat. The smell of blood and myrrh filled her lungs. At the center stood a table, not of wood or stone, but of bone. Shaped, polished, decorated with rosary beads fused into the marrow. And surrounding it, robes. Black habits. Empty, arranged in a perfect circle like a ritual frozen in time. But they weren't empty. No. Mary felt it, what remained inside them. The imprint of pain so thick it stained the air. Then, the voice. Not heard. Felt. a voice with no language, no gender. It unmade thought. Mary collapsed. When she woke, she was in her cell. Her feet were bare, listed, her palms raw, and on her pillow, that same spiral symbol, drawn in blood. She never spoke of what she saw again, but she began carving that symbol into her floorboards, into her table, even beneath her skin. Because some truths don't set you free. They bind you. And if you've made it this far, the truth about St. Mary's didn't die with its nuns. It just went deeper underground. In 1862, after nearly a decade of whispered vanishings, cryptic symbols, and what officials described as escalating irregularities, a fire broke out in the convent's east wing. The cause was never determined. Witnesses claimed lightning struck the spire. Others whispered it was divine retribution. But those who really knew, the last few surviving sisters, believed something ancient had been stirred and could no longer be contained. The flames consumed the wing in silence. No screams, no attempts to flee, and yet no bodies. The fire was limited to the east wing. The rest of the convent stood untouched. Stone walls blackened, windows shattered, but not a single corpse was ever recovered from the rubble. Mother Catherine was declared missing. Her name was quietly struck from diocesan records. No funeral, no inquiry, just deletion. And here's where the official narrative ends. The church sealed off the ruins. The land was sold to a local lumber consortium, but the buyers never took possession. In private correspondence, now archived under restricted access at the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, one of them wrote, "We walked the property. Birds wouldn't sing there. My men refused to break ground. Something under the chapel sounds like breathing." So they left it alone. Forgotten. Almost. Because in 1909, a Jesuit scholar named Father Ambrose Keller, fluent in Aramaic, obsessed with apocryphal texts, began collecting oral testimonies from retired clergy across Wisconsin. One, an aged priest on his deathbed, spoke of a convent that fed something beneath it. Keller traced the site, bribed access, and conducted 3 nights of excavations beneath the ruined chapel. What he found was never published. But his final letter, sent to a colleague in Rome, contained a single line. She was not worshipping Christ. She was feeding the womb of the silence. He died that same week, collapsed mid-sermon. Autopsy revealed no cause of death. His heart simply stopped. St. Mary's was never rebuilt, but the foundation remains, buried under weeds, sealed in cement, a forgotten relic of a church that chose silence over truth. And now you know what they tried to erase. You're not just hearing a story. You're becoming part of a pattern, the same spiral, the same hunger, the same voice waiting beneath, and it always finds a way to speak again. The Church tells us its greatest battles were fought against forces outside its walls, pagans, heretics, the devil himself. But the true war was always within. Because inside St. Mary's, the rituals were never meant to honor God. They were meant to awaken something older, something buried not just beneath stone, but beneath time itself. In 1937, a Jesuit archivist named Matthias Renner stumbled upon an unmarked wooden box in the crypt vaults of St. Ignatius College. Inside were 3 items: a rusted rosary fused with bone, a water-stained letter signed only MC, and a hand-drawn diagram of the East Wing's basement, overlaid with symbols not found in any Christian theology. Renner was no ordinary priest. He'd studied comparative religion in Egypt, Syria, and Tibet, and the moment he saw the symbols, concentric spirals intersected by slashes, he froze. One appeared identical to a glyph etched into the walls of the Assyrian tunnels beneath Abydos. Another matched carvings from a suppressed Buddhist monastery in western China, ones believed to represent gates of inversion. These symbols should not have coexisted. Different continents, different millennia, and yet here they were, beneath a Catholic convent in Wisconsin. Renner tried to alert his superiors. The letter he sent to Rome never received a reply. Instead, his access was revoked. His research was seized, and within 6 months he was reassigned to a remote post in Alaska, where he died of exposure 3 weeks after arrival. But not before hiding copies of his notes, some of which were discovered in 1996 behind the crumbling plaster of a former student chapel. One passage reads, "The East Wing was not a convent. It was a temple, not of worship, but of inversion. The nuns were not victims. They were conduits." Catherine knew. She followed an ancient architecture, and she wasn't working alone. Which brings us to the most unsettling question of all: who or what was guiding her? Because if this pattern existed before Christianity, before history itself, then Catherine was simply the latest priestess in a lineage of control far older than the Vatican, and St. Mary's wasn't a singular horror. It was a reactivation, a node, one of many. Still think this was just about a missing nun? Still think the church is afraid of scandal? No. There's a reason silence is sacred. Not because it brings peace, but because it hides screams. By 1948, rumors of St. Mary's had become ghost stories, told in low voices by hunters and truck drivers passing through the Wisconsin woods. They spoke of bells tolling at midnight with no hands to ring them, of veiled figures walking barefoot through the mist, leaving no prints behind. But the land didn't just echo with the past. It pulled. That year, a group of seminary students from Chicago, eager to test their faith against local legend, made the trip to the site. Only one would speak of what they found, and even then, only once. His name was Leo Martin. He left the seminary within a year, changed, silent, and by all accounts, afraid of churches for the rest of his life. Before his death in 1982, he left a final tape recording, discovered by his niece in a safety deposit box, labelled only, "St. Mary's, never play alone." His voice trembles as he describes what happened. "We laughed at first. The building was half buried, trees grown up through the stones. It was just ruins. But inside it was wrong. The air was still, dead, not quiet, hollow, like it had swallowed noise. There was writing on the walls, not Latin, not anything we knew, a circle with no center, a mouth that eats thought. One of the guys found a staircase behind the altar. We all heard it, the breathing. Then the humming started, like voices without sound. I don't remember walking back up. I only remember waking up in the trees. My shoes were gone. My rosary was bent into a spiral. We left something open. I don't know what. But it followed me. It still does. It waits in mirrors, in silence, in prayer. The church never acknowledged the incident. The land was reclassified, trees planted to bury the ruins. By 1960, St. Mary's had been scrubbed from all regional maps. But buried truth isn't rot. It waits. And those spirals, the ones you've seen carved into stone, burned into wood, drawn in blood, they're more than symbols. They're instructions, not to remember, but to return. Because silence is how it calls you back. They never expected anyone to start connecting the threads, not after all these years. But in 1971, someone did. Her name was Dr. Evelyn Rosenthal, a cultural anthropologist out of Fordham University. She specialized in suppressed religions, rites that predated mainstream theology. Rosenthal had a theory that behind every dominant faith there was a buried structure, a darker skeleton hidden beneath the liturgy. One built not to liberate the soul, but to bind it. Her research brought her to Wisconsin. Not for St. Mary's. She hadn't even heard of it. She was investigating indigenous mound structures when she came across an anomaly, a formation beneath old Catholic property, showing signs of symmetrical excavation, geometry too precise for natural formation, but with no known colonial construction recorded. The deeper she dug, the more impossible it became. A circle of stone, aligned not with the sun or stars, but with the dark moon. A subterranean architecture that predated every structure in the region, one that whispered, in form, the same spiral we've seen before. She traced local oral histories. Every path led her to one place, the ruins of St. Mary's. She filed a request to survey the site. 3 weeks later, her grant was revoked. Her lab was vandalized, and her student assistant, Peter Laufer, was found drowned in a baptismal font at an abandoned rectory, 20 miles from where he was last seen. Dr. Rosenthal disappeared in December of that year, but not before sending one final envelope to her colleague in New York. Inside were photographs of the East Wing ruins before they were buried. One photo shows a stone circle beneath the chapel. Another shows markings, identical to the sigils found in a forbidden grimoire known as the Lamentation Codex, a book so dangerous the Vatican has denied its existence for over 3 centuries. But Rosenthal knew. She wrote, "It's not just the nuns, not just Catherine. There's a pattern older than faith, a liturgy of the abyss. St. Mary's was a gate, and the rites they performed weren't madness. They were maintenance. They were keeping it fed." That's when the pattern snapped into focus. The disappearances weren't failure. They were sacraments. And the ones who vanished? They weren't victims. They were offerings. Not all who vanished were erased. Some were changed. In 1985, a psychiatric patient was admitted to St. Dymphna's Hospital under emergency circumstances. Female, mid-60s, no ID. Found wandering the ruins of a convent in Wisconsin, barefoot and bloodied, whispering hymns in reversed Latin. The intake nurse noted one chilling detail. The woman's back was covered in scars, concentric spirals carved with surgical precision. When asked her name, she replied in a hoarse whisper, "I was Sister Mary once, but she's been hollowed." Doctors assumed it was trauma-induced psychosis, but her vitals were stable. She was lucid, calm, too calm, until night fell. That's when the humming began. Security footage, still archived but sealed, shows the woman sitting upright in her bed at precisely 3:13 a.m. every night, humming a single sustained note that caused static interference in all recording devices. The sound was later analyzed. It contained frequencies below the human threshold of hearing, but still caused nausea, vertigo, and in one case, seizures in the reviewing technician. She refused food, refused communion, only ever whispered fragments of her past. The voice in the dark is not evil. It's older than evil. It does not punish. It empties. When a chaplain attempted to baptize her, she vomited black bile and began chanting in a voice that did not match her vocal range. Witnesses described it as both male and female, both human and not. After 3 weeks, she vanished. No forced entry, no broken locks, just an empty bed and a spiral drawn in blood across the ceiling. Authorities buried the story. Her file reads, "Escaped, unstable, likely deceased." But 2 years later, a photo surfaced from a monastery in Portugal. A nun in the background, veiled, barefoot, watching from the shadows. Spiral scars faintly visible beneath her sleeves. They called her La Silenciada, the silenced one. Some say she appears where the old rites are remembered, where the ground still pulses with that ancient hunger, where the church built its walls not to worship, but to contain. Because this isn't just a haunting, it's a breach. And those marked by it? They don't just disappear. They become doors. You were never supposed to find this. Not the spirals, not the names, not the voices buried beneath centuries of hymns and ash. But now that you have, you can't go back. Because the Church didn't abandon St. Mary's. They didn't forget. They didn't fail. They sealed it. In 1999, a covert Vatican order known only by its initials, OSM, deployed a team of ecclesiastical operatives to the St. Mary's site, trained not in theology, but in containment. The same team that responded to the Orleans blood relic incident, the same ones stationed outside the sealed libraries beneath Montserrat. They arrived in the middle of the night. No lights, no announcements, no record in diocesan logs. Local residents reported low metallic chanting drifting through the trees, earthquakes that registered on no instruments, and then silence. For 12 hours, no one entered or left the zone. When dawn came, the team was gone. In their place, a concrete monolith, 10 feet tall, no doors, no seams, just one engraving. Verba tacenda. The words must not be spoken. It stands to this day, hidden behind a tangle of state-protected forest, marked as a conservation site to keep trespassers away. But here's what they didn't expect: digital decay. In 2014, a drone enthusiast flying over old forest tracts caught footage of the monolith. The video uploaded to a now-deleted YouTube channel showed strange electromagnetic distortion near the structure, warping sound, bending light, a low pulse, almost like breathing. The user disappeared 2 weeks later, but not before posting a single line of text in the video description. They buried it wrong. The ground still listens. Since then, unofficial forums have tracked dozens of similar monoliths across the globe. Argentina, Lebanon, even beneath the Vatican itself, all placed on sites where ancient rituals once bled into the earth. All bearing and variations of the same message: be silent, be still, be sealed. So ask yourself, if this was just myth, why are they still trying to contain it? And more importantly, it was never about faith. It was about containment. Every prayer whispered in Latin, every bell tower, every stained glass window, it was all designed to distract us from the real structure beneath. Not cathedrals, cages. And St. Mary's? It was a breach point, a hairline crack in a system stretched too thin across time. In 2007, a Vatican whistleblower under the pseudonym Malachi Thorne leaked excerpts from a classified document known only as Index Obscura. It detailed over 50 anomalous ecclesiastical events spanning the last 500 years, incidents of mass disappearances, collective hallucinations, voices from crypt walls, and spirals found burned into church floors with no source of ignition. The name St. Mary's Convent, Wisconsin, appeared 9 times. One entry, dated 1870, reads, "Contact re-established beneath the east wing. Sequence incomplete. Sacrifice insufficient. Pattern weakening." Another, 1985, "Silenciada located. No retrieval attempt authorized. Risk level, contagion." And finally, in 2001, "Containment degraded. Reseal initiated. Spiral persists." But here's where it turns. Because within the same leak was a hand-drawn map, not just of St. Mary's, of every site across the globe where the spiral had appeared. When connected, they form a lattice, an ancient grid, a network of seals. St. Mary's isn't isolated. It's a node in a system designed to keep something beneath us asleep. Or perhaps fed. Every vanishing nun, every whispered hymn in reverse, every child born within the convent's walls who was never recorded, they were keeping the system operational. Maintenance through blood, through silence, through erasure. But it's failing. Because now the symbols are appearing again, On buildings, in crop fields, in digital noise. A low-frequency hum rising beneath cities, people waking from dreams they didn't know they were dream. Whispering in languages they've never spoken. The seals are weakening, and if even one fails completely, it won't just be St. Mary's that disappears. It will be the world as we understand it, because what's been locked beneath our faith isn't asleep, it's waiting. Now we reach the threshold, where history ends and revelation begins. Because everything you've heard, every nun who vanished, every spiral etched in blood, every sealed archive, every silenced witness, it all points to one final, unbroken truth. Catherine didn't die. In 2020, during a seismic retrofit beneath the oldest wing of a cathedral in Toledo, Spain, workers uncovered a chamber sealed behind 6 feet of stone. Inside, perfectly preserved in a temperature-locked crypt, was a journal. The binding, human leather, the ink, blood, the language, an archaic Spanish dialect mixed with Enochian glyphs. It was signed CMB, Servant of the Spiral. Catherine Maria Bejarano, the same woman the church claimed was lost in 1903, the same woman whose name had been erased from every convent ledger and Vatican archive. Her writings are not the ramblings of a lunatic. They are methodical. Ritual descriptions, diagrams, a detailed chronology of the awakening points across continents. She refers to them as the mouths of the deep. And in one chilling passage she writes, "Each gate requires a keeper, a womb to channel the void. At St. Mary's, I opened the first. The others will follow. Silence is not safety. It is gestation." This wasn't madness. It was calculation. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she wasn't alone. The journal lists names, dates, sacred orders, even popes, implicated not in the suppression of heresy, but in its careful orchestration. An elite circle sworn not to God, but to preservation, keeping the seals in place, feeding them when needed, and silencing those who got too close. This is why they erased her. Because Catherine wasn't a heretic. She was a guardian. A high priestess of a secret older than the church itself. One whose mission wasn't to save us, but to keep it from rising. And now that the spiral has returned, who will take her place? Because the final seal, the one beneath St. Mary's, it's breaking. And something on the other side is listening. This is where the spiral ends, or begins again. Because now you know. You've followed the whispers. You've heard the forbidden names. You've stared into the abyss carved into the convent floor. And whether you believe or not, whether you dismiss this as myth, paranoia, or well-constructed fiction, something has already shifted. The spiral is not a symbol. It's a signal. An invitation to open the wound we've spent centuries pretending was healed. And now that you've heard it, you're part of it. The church won't come after you. They don't need to. Because the system isn't designed to kill. It's designed to change. To hollow you. To make you a conduit for something ancient. A passage. A soft place in the skin of the world. A door disguised as doubt. You'll hear it soon, if you haven't already. The low hum beneath electrical lines. The static between whispered prayers. The fluttering sound when you close your eyes at night and try to forget. It starts small. A dream of cloisters where the walls are wrong. A nun who watches you without eyes. A hymn you've never heard, but somehow remember. You'll find yourself drawing spirals absent-mindedly, avoiding mirrors, flinching at silence. And then, one night, you'll wake up humming, a note you don't recognize but can't stop. That's how it begins. Catherine was the first. St. Mary's was the gate. The nuns who vanished didn't die. They transcended. Now the breach is widening. The containment grid is collapsing. And the church, the orders, the monoliths, they can't seal it again. They can only pray you won't listen. But it's too late for that, because you've already heard it. The hymn behind the silence, the spiral in your mind. And now it's your turn to choose. Will you forget, or will you follow? Because the spiral doesn't end. It opens.